Taxi driver horror story. The last fare. It was a cold, windswept night when Sam, a weary taxi driver, found himself driving through the desolate streets of the city. The hour was late, too late for anyone sane to be out, but still there was business to be done. He'd been driving for hours, the low hum of the engine the only sound keeping him company. He had learned to ignore the silence, the strange shadows that seemed to shift just beyond the corners of his eyes. In this line of work, you don't question things. You just drive. But tonight was different. It started with a call, a last-minute fare far out on the outskirts of the city. Normally, Sam would have turned it down, but there was something about this one. The voice on the other end of the line had been cold, distant. It sounded like it had come from far away, too far away. The voice had spoken only a few words: "Pick me up at the old cemetery. Midnight." He didn't think twice. You should have. As Sam approached the cemetery, a strange chill seemed to settle over him, crawling down his spine, turning the inside of the cab into an icebox. His breath came out in heavy puffs, and his hands, gripping the steering wheel, had started to tremble without him realizing. The cemetery stood like a monument to something long forgotten, an ancient place, its stone walls covered in layers of decay. The rusted gates creaked in the wind, as though they were whispering secrets they should never share. He parked his cab at the entrance, the headlights cutting through the dense fog. It was so thick that even the closest tombstones seemed to vanish into it, swallowed by an oppressive darkness. Then he saw her. A woman. She stood at the edge of the cemetery, her figure draped in a long black dress that fluttered as though caught in an invisible wind. Her face was hidden beneath the shadow of her hood, but her presence was unmistakable. Sam's heart raced as he hesitated, his foot hovering over the brake pedal. Something was wrong. She was wrong. But he couldn't turn back now, not when she had already begun walking toward him. She reached the passenger side of the cab and Sam unlocked the door, his hand shaking so violently he had to steady it against the dashboard. "Where to?" Sam asked, his voice low, barely above a whisper. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slid into the seat, her movements unnaturally slow, as though each step was measured, deliberate. As she settled into the seat, he caught a glimpse of her face. Her skin was pale, unnaturally pale, the color of old bone. Her eyes, when they finally met his, were black. Not just dark, but endless pits of night, absorbing everything in their gaze. They felt like holes, pulling him in, drowning him in a darkness that made his chest tighten. He swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. "Where to?" he repeated, louder this time, trying to mask the rising panic that clawed at his throat. Her voice, when it came, was soft, too soft. It was a murmur, barely audible over the sound of the engine idling. "Take me to the old church on Westgate Hill." The church was miles away, an abandoned ruin on the outskirts of town. It had been closed for decades, rumored to be haunted. Sam didn't argue. Something in her presence, something in the hollow abyss of her gaze, made it clear that to refuse would be unwise. He started the car, the engine's growl filling the silence between them. The streets outside were empty, dark, as though the world had fallen asleep long ago. He kept his eyes on the road, but every now and then, he couldn't help but glance at her in the rearview mirror. Each time, her eyes seemed to draw closer, her face more defined, as if she were creeping out from the shadow of the cab. "Why the church?" Sam asked, his voice barely more than a strained breath. Her lips twitched upward in a faint, eerie smile, but it wasn't a smile of comfort. It was wrong. "You'll understand soon enough," she whispered. The fog thickened as they neared the outskirts, and a strange, unnatural stillness blanketed the area. The hum of the engine sounded distant, muffled as though it were coming from underwater. The roads began to narrow, twisting in ways they shouldn't. The city lights faded, and the only thing visible now was the thickening fog and the silhouette of the church looming in the distance, like a dark sentinel waiting for them. Then, without warning, the air inside the cab grew colder, so cold that Sam's breath began to freeze, misting up the windows. He shivered, his skin breaking out in goosebumps. He reached for the heat controls, but the buttons did nothing. The temperature inside continued to drop, and the woman in the back seat, she wasn't moving anymore. She was watching him. Sam's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. The road ahead twisted in unnatural, impossible turns. The world outside was no longer real. The fog had become thicker, closing in around him like a suffocating vice. Panic rose in his chest. The woman's eyes were now glowing, two deep, empty pools of darkness. Suddenly, the car jerked violently to the side. Sam gasped, his heart hammering as the wheels screeched against the asphalt, narrowly missing a tree. He swerved to regain control, but when he glanced at the rearview mirror again, she was gone. No. She was still there, her figure standing in the darkness beyond the window, but she wasn't inside the cab. She was outside staring in. Her mouth moved, but there was no sound. Her hands pressed against the glass, her face twisted in an expression of agony. Sam slammed his foot on the gas pedal, but the car refused to move. The fog was thick, too thick. The engine sputtered and died. He tried restarting it, but it wouldn't budge. And then, from the depths of the silence, he heard her voice. "You shouldn't have come. Something was wrong. Everything was wrong." Sam didn't know it yet, but the nightmare was only just beginning. If you've made it this far, you're already part of it. Don't look away. Don't look behind you. You're about to find out just how deep the darkness goes. Subscribe to hear the rest of this nightmare. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. The Curse of the Last Fair. Sam's hands were slick with sweat as he gripped the steering wheel, his heart thudding in his chest like a drum, every beat a reminder of how utterly trapped he was. He fumbled with the ignition, trying again to restart the engine, but the car remained lifeless. The silence outside was maddening, a silence so thick it pressed in on his ears, making his own breath sound too loud, too frantic. The woman, the thing that had sat behind him just moments ago, was still outside, standing at the edge of the fog, her form barely visible but unmistakably there. Her pale face was now twisted in a grotesque expression of silent rage, her mouth moving in unnatural shapes, but no sound reached him. Just the horrific sensation of being watched, of something waiting. The air inside the car was suffocating now, heavy and cold. The fog that had been drifting over the streets was crawling into the cab itself, tendrils of white mist curling around the gear shift, seeping through the cracks in the windows, wrapping around Sam like a tightening noose. He felt the temperature drop so sharply that his teeth began to chatter, his body shaking violently as if the very marrow in his bones had frozen solid. She's coming for you," Sam muttered to himself, barely able to hear his own voice over the rising panic. The woman's words echoed in his mind. "You shouldn't have come." But what did that mean? What was she? The whispers were louder now, not from outside the car, but from inside, rising from the darkness in his mind. There was something wrong with the woman. Something ancient. Her presence felt like a curse, a terrible, inescapable curse that wrapped around his very soul. Every moment he spent in the car, he could feel it tightening, like the claws of something that had been watching, waiting for the right time to strike. Sam forced himself to look at the rearview mirror again. This time she was closer, too close. Her black eyes were inches from the glass, her face pressed against it, her breath fogging up the window like a lover's kiss. But there was nothing affectionate about it. Her face, pale as death, gaunt and stretched, seemed to distort, stretching unnaturally as she opened her mouth wider and wider. Her jaw unhinged, a sickening crack sounding like bones snapping, and she began to scream. But the scream wasn't a sound, it was an imprint on his mind, a pulse of pure terror that reverberated through his bones, shaking him to his core. The scream didn't end. It grew louder, more agonizing. It filled the car, drowning out everything else. The windows rattled violently, the doors creaked as if they might shatter. His heart pounded in his chest, but the worst part, was that he couldn't escape it. He couldn't stop hearing it. The scream was inside him now, deep in his brain, crawling through his thoughts like a living thing. No, please. Sam screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the endless shriek. And then, as abruptly as it had started, the scream ceased. The car fell silent once more. But Sam wasn't alone. He turned slowly, dread crawling up his spine, and saw her sitting next to him, her form so close it made his skin crawl. She was no longer outside the car, no longer in the shadows. She was with him. Her breath, icy and putrid, brushed against his cheek as she leaned in close. Her black eyes stared at him, and her cold, cracked lips parted as she whispered just 3 words, her voice a low, guttural hiss. "You can't leave." The words seemed to latch onto him, digging into his skin, worming their way into his soul. He tried to move, to scream, to do anything, but his body wouldn't obey. His fingers were frozen to the steering wheel, his legs like stone beneath him. The car, the road, everything outside, none of it existed anymore. The world had been consumed by the oppressive darkness that clung to every inch of his being. "You were never meant to leave," she whispered again, her voice now a low, cruel chuckle. Her face contorted as if it were being pulled into a grotesque grin. Her mouth stretched wider, impossibly wide, showing teeth like jagged shards of bone. And then she lunged forward. The nightmare shattered Sam's mind. His body, his soul, everything fractured, splintering as he felt her hands wrap around his throat. The pressure was unrelenting. Her fingers were cold as ice, and as they squeezed, it felt like the very life was being sucked from him. The world grew darker, the edges of his vision blackening as he gasped for air that would not come. This was it. This was the end. But just as the darkness was about to consume him completely, a horrifying thought flashed through his mind. The woman wasn't here to kill him. She wasn't trying to end his life. No, she was cursing him. She was making him one of them. He could feel it, the cold, creeping sensation wrapping around his soul, branding him. His pulse slowed. The life drained from his limbs, but in its place, something darker, colder, more ancient began to rise. It wasn't death. It was worse. It was possession. Sam's body slumped forward, his head resting against the steering wheel. His breath was shallow. His heartbeat was erratic. But his eyes were wide open. He was still awake. He could feel everything. And the worst part? The woman's laugh, deep and guttural, echoed inside his mind. You're mine now. Forever. Suddenly the car jerked forward. The engine roared to life, and Sam's hands moved of their own accord, gripping the wheel, steering the cab down the fog-choked road, down into the abyss. He wasn't driving. She was. And she was taking him somewhere far darker than he could ever have imagined. If you heard this story, you might already know. You're never really alone. Not anymore. Are you brave enough to close your eyes tonight? Are you ready to face the darkness? If you dare, subscribe. But remember, some nightmares never end.